Good evening, everyone. It gives me an immense pleasure to welcome you all to the inaugural session of the Heritage Insight series, a monthly platform which delves into a wide array of topics including regional history, cultural heritage, arts, handicrafts, and their contemporary relevance to architectural practices. This initiative is a proud collaboration between BMS School of Architecture, Yelahanka, and CRDS Foundation. This series aims to foster a deeper understanding of Karnataka's rich historical legacy, vibrant culture, and diverse artistic traditions. The series is designed to engage faculty members, early career academicians, PhD scholars, and postgraduate students from disciplines such as architecture, history, humanities, and art. We aim to enhance participants' knowledge of Karnataka's cultural heritage while encouraging interdisciplinary exchange and collaboration, and to create a space where thought leaders, young minds, and seasoned professionals can engage in meaningful discussions, share insights, and collaboratively explore solutions that are rooted in tradition yet adaptable to modern needs. Together, we aspire to promote a greater appreciation of Karnataka's architectural and cultural legacy while contributing to its preservation for future generations. This dialogue series is not just an academic exercise, but a call to action for the entire community to embrace our heritage, champion its relevance, and contribute meaningfully to its preservation and evolution. It is my pleasure to introduce Dr. Shaila Bantanur, the director of BMS School of Architecture, Yelahanka. She holds a doctoral degree from the prestigious IIT Roorkee and has over 20 years of experience as a researcher, academician, and practitioner. Dr. Bantanur has contributed significantly to research with publications in national and international journals and is currently leading two international collaborations with the University of Notre Dame, USA and Kathmandu University, Nepal. She has received several awards, including the Intact UK Scholarship Award, the Intact Merit Award. She actively promotes industry academia collaborations through initiatives like the Research Dialogue Series, Knowledge Series, and the New Heritage Insight Series. I now invite Dr. Bantanur to share a few words.
Thank you, Abhirami. Good start. I hope I'm audible.
Ma'am, your mic is...
It's there. I hope it's audible.
We are not able to hear you, ma'am.
We are able to hear you, ma'am. You were able to hear you.
Yeah, thank you. Thank you, and it's a good start, Abhirami.
Ma'am, we are still not able to hear you.
No, I think others can hear.
Yes, ma'am, we are able to hear you, ma'am.
Okay.
Yeah, fine. I could see the response from participants also. So yeah, once again, very warm welcome to, first of all, the speaker of the day, Krupa. I will be really, excited to, wanted to see the kind of a presentation which you will be, because I went through your CV and all that. It's amazing, and eager to go for your presentation. But before that, I wanted to welcome all the participants from across so many different institutions and academicians, and not only the academicians, also there are students, they are practicing architects, and there are even allied fields also. So which really, made us a good start, and it inspired us to go with this kind of a series. And since it's a first series, I just want to take just a 1 minute of yours time to explain about our organization, that is BMS School of Architecture, Yelahanka. I'm sure most of us, or most of you people, are aware of what is BMS as an educational trust is all about. So this is the BMS Educational Trust, established in the year 1946, the 1 year before the independence. And this is a first institution, the private engineering institution, which started in the year 1946, as I mentioned. And we started with the engineering college. And I'm also very privileged to say here that BMS School of Architecture is again the first independent architecture school in Karnataka, and having both accreditation and as well as ranking. Though we are the first independent architecture school to have a NAC accreditation as well as NIRF ranking. And with all set my team, and who are working hard to set all these benchmarks. Apart from that, we also have a very good practices. As we have seen that today's is one of the great initiative which is called as Heritage Insights. But apart from that, we started Research Dialogue series, which every month we do have a platform which we have created for all the research scholars and faculties who have enrolled for the either full-time or the part-time research. For that, we call it as a Research Dialogue series. We are getting really very good response from so many people across India, even some from abroad as well. And on the similar pattern, we started even the knowledge series. We do take the emerging issues, which may be urban, which may be anything related to architecture. But again, that is once in 2 months we do have those series. Again, we got a really good response, and for especially for the students, we started Design Dialogue series, which happens once in a month, and it is in-person interaction with the students. And where we thought these series are focusing more of architecture and allied fields, and which is most of them we are like, we opened it for all students and architecture faculties. But we thought let us open for publics as well as any allied fields which may be helpful for people to understand what is Karnataka history, and both tangible and intangible, as Abhirami rightly said, that we want to focus everything which is not only the tangible but also as intangible. That's why this platform we have created in collaboration with CRDS, so that anybody can attend. Even sometimes if the resource person, if they say like they are very they can even explain in the local language, we are also keeping that option also open for the audience. So with this respect, as a school, we always believe in kind of a collaboration. So we, as a BMS School of Architecture, we signed a lot of MOUs with a very prestigious institutions like Karnataka Janpadalok, and with Intech we have signed MOU, and also Karnataka Chitrakala Parishad and PWD, and there are many more MOUs which we have signed. And recently we signed MOU with the CRDS Foundation. With that, this is the first initiative where we thought let us create this kind of a platform where we can discuss more of a tangible and intangible heritage. And here we made an effort to see that it is not directly related with the temple architecture, but we are calling a resource person who have worked extensively on these domains. So with this, I again once again want to welcome all the participants, and thank you, Krupa, for accepting our invitation and being a part of this first resource person for this heritage insights. I'm sure the people will really like, because of short duration, maybe 10-15 days we started sending these invite, but still we got really good response. I just want to mention the kind of colleges who have registered for this series is like from RV College of Architecture, then Sharan Basava University, then Mysore School of Architecture, BNCA from Pune. A lot of our faculties have also registered. And apart from that, interestingly, I could see one is a chartered accountant who has registered for this. Apart from that, there are the land, even the construction industry people also they have enrolled, and some of the students, and there are few architects also they have enrolled for this. This shows like it's a good initiation where we wanted to keep this option open for a lot of people apart from architects, and we got really good response. Definitely other things, and we are also like finalized for the next series also. So I think that we'll be releasing soon. So with this, thank you, Abhirami. And then I think we can go ahead with another our partner, that CRDS. So since it's a kind of a collaborative event, so I want to invite architect Shobha also for this. Thank you.
Thank you, ma'am. I also take an immense pleasure in introducing architect Shobha Narendra Kumar, an architect and urban planner with over 25 years of experience and the founder of IPAC, a multidisciplinary architecture firm based in Bangalore. An accomplished alumna of IIM and a celebrated woman entrepreneur, she combines her architectural expertise with a deep passion for exploring India's rich heritage structure, focusing on Karnataka state. Her commitment to preserving and promoting India's cultural legacy led to the establishment of the CRDS Foundation, where she focuses on heritage conservation and creating sustainable living spaces. Architect Shobha spearheads the Center for Research and Development on Sustainability for Life, an NGO dedicated to exploring Karnataka's uncharted territories and advancing sustainable solutions for future generations. I now request Architect Shobha Narendra Kumar, Director CRDS Foundation, to say a few words.
Thanks, Abhirami. And it's my pleasure to introduce CRDS Foundation. Our organization is dedicated to preserving and promoting India's rich cultural heritage. So at CRDS Foundation, we also aim at conducting in-depth research on India's built and unbuilt heritage, explored and unexplored places in India. And then we also organize knowledge sessions, workshops, seminars, and we are also looking forward to host a lot of events showcasing India's art. So we also would like to collaborate with a lot of scholars, artists, and enthusiasts for these kind of activities and events. And we also educate and engage the community, especially the youth, how to take these things to the next future generation as well. And we look forward to have more and more participation for the preservation of heritage in India. And we welcome Dr. Krupa for an engaging and enlightening session about HAMPI, the most awaited session, I can say. And thank you all. I mean, there are a lot of architects and other varied professionals also who are going to be a part of this particular session today. Thank you very much.
Thank you, ma'am. Welcome to the first session of the Heritage Dialogue series titled HAMPI Beyond Monuments and More Than History. We are delighted to have Dr. Krupa Rajangam, a distinguished conservation architect, social geographer, and Fulbright Fellow, join us today. With over 20 years of interdisciplinary experience, Dr. Rajagam's work bridges heritage conservation, anthropology, and social geography, emphasizing community engaged and critical theory driven approaches. As a founder director of Saythu, linking people and heritage, she has led impactful projects in cultural heritage management, experiential education, and socially inclusive conservation practices. A passionate educator, she has developed and taught courses on digital heritage, placemaking, community histories, and urban heritage management, while running an immersive field school that fosters hands on understanding of people and places. Her research on the Hampi World Heritage Site explores conservation, contestation, and conflict, contributing to global discussions on urbanism and heritage management. Dr. Rajangam's achievements include the prestigious Fulbright Fellowship, Charles Wallace Fellowship, and numerous research grants. Her ongoing work at the University of Pennsylvania's Weizmann School of Design further cements her role as a thought leader in heritage placemaking and social sustainability. We warmly welcome all participants to engage in this session where Dr. Rajangam will guide us in reimagining Hampi as a living, evolving cultural landscape beyond monuments and conventional history. Ma'am, to you. Over to you.
Thank you, Abhirami, and thank you, BMSSA and the CRDS Foundation. It was actually useful to know the background context of what you were talking about in terms of the series. So this is to the audience. I've prepared like a discussion for a general audience, which is not just architects or those who are aware of the locations. And in a way, it's not merely about insights into the heritage landscape of Hampi. It is about what can we learn from these insights. So it also brings in your knowledge and research series as well. So that's broadly the trajectory. At any point of time, you have any queries, I think maybe you can drop it into chat, and Abhirami, you can let me know, because I don't think I can see chat pop up, right, once I start sharing screen.
Sure, ma'am.
Yeah. All right, so let's get started. All good?
Yes, it's
Yes, ma'am.
visible.
All right. Thank you all. So just jumping straight in. And as you were all talking, I realized I took it for granted that everybody knows where Hampi is. So I haven't even bothered to put in a slide locating Hampi. But anyway, let's plunge it. Just to give you some background of where I'm coming from, like what is my perspective to enter the landscape. I'm a conservation architect, have been for over 20 years. So we've done like a full gamut of projects ranging from physical conservation uh, to adaptive reuse, reconstruction. But my personal interest is more at looking at heritage and conservation as social processes. So I've also undertaken a number of initiatives to try and figure out what are the perspectives of various communities living in and around conservation and heritage landscapes. What are their thoughts on that heritage site? Uh, and I'm not even going to like jump into this. So this is like a broad view to say that by now, as a group, I'm assuming we're all aware that heritage is much more than this, right? So I don't think I need to reinforce that message through this conversation. But any of you have any doubts, you can raise it up in Q&A and we can talk about it. HAMPI is a World Heritage Site. It was designated as such by UNESCO. So for those of you who may not be like kind of aware of the nuances here, as I keep emphasizing, the World Heritage Site is a list, right? So it's not that if a site is designated as World Heritage, it has these kind of universal values that all of humankind shares in. It is more about here is a site that represents a particular aspect of heritage for this country or this region. And it's a way to celebrate that across with other locations, right? So it is actually impossible to talk about locations as having universal values because these values depend on the geographical and cultural context, right? So that's my broad premise. So these images represent a broad understanding of how most of us would know Hampi. We would know it as a monument. We would know that it represents a particular historical past. But what else is it? So my work is ethnographic, which means I've sort of worked on the ground for extended periods of time. So in the case of Hampi, not only have I worked there professionally as a conservation architect, but also formally for research. I was living in the villages in and around for about 16 months. Trying to understand different perspectives of the people on how the site is conserved and managed and what they understand as Hampi's heritage. So I'm going to start us on like a small journey, um, saying let's assume that I've called in to look at some aspect of, say, Virupaksha temple as a professional. Right? So then what does this mean? I'm called in to advise on some sort of, say, reconstruction or restoration program, or how is the temple being managed when it is sitting in the midst of this landscape? So what are the things that one might sort of encounter, and what are the decisions that one might take, and what is the insight into the landscape in the process? So if I start with the Garbhagriha, right, like right in front of Virupaksha Garbhagriha, let's assume I'm there. And these are like the bunch of pilgrims who are sitting there. It is one of the rituals annually observed in front of Virupaksha. So they're waiting for that to start. And I look up at the ceiling, and then what do I see? I see this like rich mural painting there from the medieval period. So if I am interested in looking at, say, some aspect of managing this particular structure, not only am I looking at its art historical value, the value of the pigments used for these mural paintings, but it's also about perceptions of the pilgrims and visitors about these mural paintings, right? So that's just at the Garbhagriha alone. From the Garbhagriha, I walk out into the courtyard of the temple. And I encountered a lot of pilgrims who are actually staying over at the Virupaksha temple complex because they've come there for the annual Jatre, which is a 7-day event, right? So for their benefit, because it's obviously like a semi-arid climate, they've erected these temporary shelters. So as a conservation architect or as a historian or an archaeologist, I might be like, this is interference with my work because I'm trying to attempt to look at the various values of the site. And here are people who have like occupied it. But again, that's something that I need to balance, right? So for example, this is the same courtyard. So some years back, there was an effort to sort of bring up there's a small Kalyani within this courtyard, which had been covered because it was like a safety risk for young children with pilgrim families who were coming in there. But some years back, it was decided now they had the bandwidth to unearth the Kalyani again and reconnect it, right? So while this work is going on, how does one then balance the needs of pilgrims who still expect to be able to access the site? And there are other visitors who have come to see it as a World Heritage Site, right? And then there are like professionals or there are research scholars who expect to see a particular aspect or study an inscription or be able to trace the materials which have been used here. And this is just, I'm still in the courtyard of the temple. So then as I'm walking out of the temple from the main Gopuram, I encounter this group of um residents from the villages in and around the World Heritage Site who are doing a ritualistic procession. Now, this procession is new to me. So I decided, okay, let's follow them and see what is happening here because they're actually starting their procession at the temple complex. So as I walk out of the temple entrance, again, depending on the season, right? So there might be this ritual where I saw these people with a kalasha on their head, but at a different point of time, I come here, it is completely crowded with thousands of pilgrims who have come for the annual Jatre, the chariot procession of the temple. So you can see that some of them are trying to balance against the safety railings. There's somewhere where it looks like a ditch, because at the same time as this Jatre is going on and people have come to see the Jatre, you see at a different point of time, right? So this kind of rhythm of this landscape is not just during the day, it's not just during the season, it's also like day and night. So in the night, you have a different sort of a pilgrimage where, let's say it's for Shivratri, they're staying up all night and they want to like sit there and do Jagrane. How does one accommodate them? But at a different point of time, when there is neither the Jatre nor a local ritual nor like Shivratri, it's back to being an archaeological landscape. And you see there are these workers from the Archaeological Survey of India trying to like stabilize some parts of it that have been excavated, some of the mandavas that are being reconstructed, and all of this happening in that one location. I still haven't really walked very far down from the entrance of the temple. So I continue to walk down Bazaar Street and I see that there are a bunch of people who are setting up stalls, right? And these stalls, as I observe and as I record, there is a rhythm to it also. So I make conversations and I realize that somebody's been setting up a stall at that particular location for 20 years. And before him, like his father was running that stall and now he's running that stall. And there is a sense of pride that every year he comes back at this particular festival or this particular location and people anticipate that he will sell his sweets at that location, right? So to me, who's a visitor, it might just be like, oh, they're setting up temporary stalls, or this is like informal activity in front of the bazaar. But there is a rhythm and there is like an order even to this, which is not something that one would typically assume so. I continue walking further down and I am distracted by another set of rituals, another group of people who are different from those who are holding the kalaksha on their head. But they are also walking down Bazaar Street because for them, Bazaar Street is like the core of what is the World Heritage landscape. So then I get distracted. I'm leaving the stalls behind. I'm leaving the people with the kalaksha behind, and I start following maybe this group because this is very new to me. I've not seen a ritual like this. So they all reach the far end of the Bazaar Street. So you see at the distance, that's the Gopuram and that's the temple complex where we started. And now we've come to the far end of the Bazaar Street. And then there is somebody else who's setting up a stage for some event at the far end of the Bazaar Street, near the location of where there is the Eduru Basvana Mandapa and the steps which lead up to Matanga, Parvata, and other parts of the site. At this point, these various processions sort of turn off. So one of them walks up the steps to go beyond Achutaraya temple to another shrine there. Another walks towards the river, right? So let's say I decide to follow the group which is going towards the river. So there is another temple complex close to the river, which is where in the night at a particular time of the year, there is the engagement ceremony held of Virupaksha and Pampa, right? And this is done typically as one would expect any grand engagement ceremony in India. So you have the boy side, you have the girl side, you have negotiations over the contract, you have the priest officiating, and this takes place all night. And this is something that, again, you wouldn't really know if you were visiting casually. So then I come back to the temple because I've seen this, I've seen one side of it. I'm like, let's focus back on the temple because my core is like looking at this monumental building, which some of us might say living heritage, some of us might call it like ritualistic landscape, they might call it metaphysical landscape, anything, right? So I'm back at the temple here and I notice that as I climb up one of the gopurams on the top, there is water flowing on the top of the mandapa. So which is again something you would not expect. So this is where then I decide to go back and trace where this water is coming from. Why is it flowing on top of the mandapa? And I go back, it leads me to this Kalyani, which is right behind the temple, and the water is being diverted from here. So I trace the path of the Kalyani, let's say, and say, where is this water coming from? So I go further back, and there is this intricate sort of canal network, which to a casual observer may not look like anything beyond just the canal. But then you correlate it with like historical texts, you talk to like people locally, and you realize that right from the early historical period, this has been designated as an Irrawaddy zone. It has been managed as a irrigated landscape. And these canals, which just look like canals queues, have been there for like a few hundred years, and water is continuing to flow from there by gravity from different parts of the river. And obviously, where there is water and it's meant to be an irrigated landscape, whose needs does it serve? So this water is then for the fields and the farmers who have been growing produce here for hundreds of years, right? But I'm still a conservation architect. So then I see this kind of a complex in the middle of these fields and I start questioning, right? Oh, I can't access that complex. It's in the middle of somebody's field. What do I do now? How do I enable access to it? And then you have visitors who decide that, oh, this looks picturesque. Let's go in there and let's take photographs. And they want access to this particular location. And finally, I follow the track of the canal. And I said it flows by gravity. So it comes from one part of the river upstream and it goes back to another part of the river downstream. So I'm back at the river. And for me now, the river is not just something that I look at. It's not something that I dip my feet in. I notice that the river is also useful for not just like visitors, for somebody to sit there and take photographs. It's also very much central to the day-to-day life of the people who still live within the World Heritage Site, right? So they're using it to wash their clothes, they're having a ritualistic bath maybe, or they're just also just sitting there and picnicking by the river banks because it is their backyard, it is beautiful, and why should they not picnic by the riverside, right? So I come in there expecting like to look at the archaeological side, the architectural side, the historical side, but I forget that it also has a social life. There are people for whom it is their homes and backyards. But is it just people? So I'm there, I'm looking at the rocks. Some of these rocks have also been designated as a geological monument for India because they're some of the oldest rocks on planet Earth, not just like in terms of geological type. And in between the rocks, you have these otters which swim out there. So that's when I realized, oh wait, it's not just about whether it's cultural values or social values, it also has like ecological values, environmental values, right? And this stretch is actually an otter preserve now. And it overlaps with the boundary of what we look at as a cultural World Heritage Site. And is it just otters? So there are also leopards, there are also bears. And then since I've done long-term field work, I have people who tell me that this particular leopard likes to sit at this particular rock. It comes back regularly at this time of the year. And if you go there, you'll see it'll be there. It doesn't disturb us, but we know it's there. Then I go to completely another end of the landscape. And here are like visitors, pilgrims, curious tourists, people who don't know why these steps are like painted white, just want to climb and see what is going on, which is now celebrated as like the birthplace of Lord Hanuman. Then finally, if I try to sort of look at the whole of that location, try to encompass and make sense of the whole landscape, I started with just the Garbhagudi of, say, Virupaksha temple complex that you see in the background. And then I walked on Bazaar Street, which is in the foreground, and then you see there are fields, and then you see there are like coconut orchards, you see there's the river, there is another side to the river, there are homes. All of this comes together. And this is probably the reason why this location was chosen to be the capital of the Vijayanagara dynasty, right? I mean, people have compared this to Rome. So I would say, like, just to give a sense of, how urbanized it is, but I would say one can actually see the traces of this kind of a heterogeneous past in the landscape, but we just need to know where to look. So if I try to make sense of all of this, we know that Hampi is not just monuments, they're all clued into that. We know it's not just a site. Let's say we now say it's a riverine landscape. We also use words like, oh, it's a historical landscape, cultural landscape, like depending on our specific interest, what are we interested in, we put that kind of a label on the landscape, right? Then how is this then tied back to heritage conservation, heritage management, what we consider heritage? before I jump into that, I want to just take a little bit of time to again go beyond, right? So we have looked at what is the site, what is the landscape, how it sits there. But there are people who have been maintaining the site and the landscape for a very long time, right? So this was a 3-year project which I did to study the crafts of the Hampi region. And I won't call it unchanged since time immemorial because that does not make any sense. Crafts change, practitioners change. But broadly, what it means is there are a set of people whose livelihoods and whose creative side is also connected with the landscape. So even if it is a simple matter of we saw the jatre, so there is a chariot that is made for the jatre. Who repairs the chariot regularly? Who gets to decide who pulls the chariot first, right? So there are all of these kind of connections with the landscape. But is it merely that, right? So it's not just people using the river, let's say, for their bathing or whatever, but the people who live in and around the region are not just the people who visit Hampi as a World Heritage Site. They are also as much claimants of the landscape as these other visitors, right? So these are the regional visitors who've come because they know the regular cycle of events. They know that, oh, this is where I can cook food. This is where I can set up like a stall to like come here with my whole family, and then we can stay for a couple of days. And this is where we will picnic as well. So there is also this other kind of uses against the backdrop of what I might see as ancient past. And a completely different spectrum of this is the everyday, right? It's the people who live there. So for me, it's Bazaar Street, but to that child, it is his bus stop. Okay, so that's where his like school bus picks him up, it drops him back, and he goes to his home. He walks where he's going. And then there are people who are trying to maintain their homes. They've been living there for 3 generations now, but who find it difficult to get permission because they're living within a World Heritage landscape. Which is why that blacksmith is sort of having to practice his trade in the open air because he can't set up a shelter because it's too close to a monument, right? So there are these kind of values as well in this particular location. So we've already discussed this as the various labels we could put on the landscape. How is this connected with what is heritage or what is conservation, right? So then let's say we go a little further and say, oh, it's not just like agricultural landscape, it's an economic landscape, it's about crafts and creative industries, it's also a familiar landscape, it's people's homes and backyards. So we might have started with some notion of we know what heritage is, we know what we need to do to look at like what we see as heritage insights. But as we sort of open up and we get in depth at that particular location, we see what are the other kind of roles that might come in together under this broad umbrella of what is heritage. But is it merely that, right? So my work has also shown that it's a conflicted landscape. It is all of this, but there is also a layer of conflict. So what you're seeing here is the Google Earth image of the same Bazaar Street, say 15 years ago and more recently. And as you can see, what the farmers say or what the farmers feel is that what was green is becoming brown. So which is how they would have conversations with me saying, you know, you don't need us to point to locations that have been acquired for archaeological excavation or for monument conservation. You just look for fences, you look for barren land, and you will know that was somebody's field that we have been tilling before it became a World Heritage Site and that has now been acquired. And you can see this gradual green turning to brown. So I've written about the conflict. The focus of today's conversation is not the conflict. It is more about trying to understand what is this location that some of us see as a World Heritage Site mean to a lot more people. So there is a lot written about this as well. So in 2011, for the proper governance and conservation of the site, 328 households that were living on either side of the Bazaar Street, they were asked to leave. Okay. And I'm not here to debate the pros and wrongs or rights and wrongs of this, but you can see the stark transformation in terms of the landscape at that point of time. And I've written about this as well, so you can look it up, right? And so for some people now, not only is it a familiar landscape, not only is it like a cultural landscape, not only is it like a ancient dynastic landscape, it's also a fractured landscape. It's also a conflicted landscape where day to day they still feel these kind of sort of impositions on them. So where does this bring us back to? We've already set aside that it's not just a monument or a site or a riverine landscape. It's not just an economic landscape. So while I have a problem with using labels, because as you can see with deep engagement with different locations, it's really challenging or nearly impossible to capture what that landscape might be. So for now, a colleague and I have decided that a label of lived landscape may be a way to get our point across, saying this particular location is not just about history, it's not just about archaeology, it's not just about architecture, it's not just about whether it's tangible or intangible, nature or culture, knowledge or know-how or practice. It's all of this, right? So typically as heritage and conservation folk, we tend to focus exclusively on the harmony, which is not a bad thing, but we need to be aware that there is another side to it also, that it's not just dynamic, but it's also contested. So that's when we can sort of work in a more broader and more inclusive manner, right? Because as I have argued, all of these various people who are now dependent directly or indirectly on this landscape. They all care for the landscape. So the differences are in the nature of this care. So which is why I've called this in my work as bureaucracies of care in terms of how we manage these historical landscapes. Right. So where does this take us? Like I know you were sort of expecting maybe in depth for me to like talk about, oh, what a fantastic landscape this is. I'm happy to have that kind of a conversation, but it's more about, like I said, bringing in the knowledge and the research insights, and how do we then apply it back in particular locations, right? So, which is where we come to the works that myself and a colleague are now doing, which is looking at the social and historical geographies of some of these landscapes beyond this sort of, oh, we're doing nature culture, oh, we're doing interdisciplinary. Like, how does one truly understand what the landscape means, right? It's not something that you see, it's not something that you read as an archive. It's also like a source of life. No? Your sustenance is dependent on the landscape, and which is quite critical now, given like the kind of concerns we have over like sustainability, climate change, right? And what I've shown here are the four landscapes that we are now being studying at in depth. Ramanasamudram in southern Tamil Nadu is where we run our biennial field school. And the way we work is like we bring in insights from research, insights from teaching, insights from practice, and to see how they can all feed back into a sort of a pedagogical resource that can be then used in the classroom to talk about how deeply embedded we are with landscape. And when I say we, it's not just we as in people who visit the particular landscape or people who study the landscape from a scholarly perspective, but also the we is the people who have been living in that landscape, who may not have lived in that landscape, say for the 500, 600 years when we chose to designate it as heritage, but who have been there for 3-4 generations, which is long enough for them to call it like their ancestral land as well, right? So this is the kind of perspective that we try to bring across. I've just given like a very simple broad overview. I'm going to stop at this point. Any of the threads that I discussed, I'm happy to like, bring that up again to take it forward. Yeah.
So type it on the chat.
Or if they can unmute and ask, that's also fine, like anything. Whatever they're comfortable with.
I think let me start with the question with me itself. Like, Krupa, it's a very, very interesting presentation. In fact, what I could see is like, many a times when we go for any kind of a listing or, identifying the heritage based on this, the identifying it or listing and all that. So we, most of the time we do talk about only the tangible heritage. Many times, or in fact, I could say the tangible doesn't come alone. It has its so many surroundings, or sometimes even a lot of intangible things are a integral part of it, where we generally we segregate that tangible should be treated, or should be studied from some set of people, and tangible or intangible is some set of people. Somewhere I could see that the kind of a integration is little bit missing. Because when I was doing my research, or even the master's level, I was just extensively working on heritage pressings. So during that time, I was as a part of literature, I was going through the HAMPI itself. So I could see, I don't know whether it has been implemented over there, but I could see the HAMPI as a different pressings. So they have identified, the core area, then peripheral area, and the secondary ring or third ring or something like that. But the problem is, like, they have dealt with only how the in with respect to tangible thing. But what in one of the slide, it was so interesting to know a lot of intangible practices or cultural practices. Even I think there must be a lot of communities which will be having their own rituals. I was even surprised to know a couple of marriage rituals are happening in the precinct itself. So my question to you is, like, are there any set of guidelines for the intangible or these cultural practices also when it happens in the vicinity of these World Heritage sites? So I don't know, I am not even aware, because my area of research is more into the tangible, and then identifying the precinct area, or a little bit not on a conservation at all. But I'm just more curious to know, are there any set guidelines for even the cultural, or the intangible heritage practices also? Or is there any agency who is looking after this, and then who will say, okay, now these kind of rituals should be in this way? Because end of the day, that also will have some issues or complexities, which will maybe having an impact on the, maybe on a positive or maybe on a negative side as well for the tangible heritage. So I don't know how those both will balance tangible and intangible practices. Yeah, this is my question.
I mean, I don't want this to be like a conversation around law, but a lot of it comes back to how it's defined legally, right? So when you say World Heritage, since we have signed UNESCO's World Heritage Convention, legally, we have framed that landscape as a landscape of tangible assets, let's say, because that is how the World Heritage Convention frames it, right? So, which is why the HAMPI local planning area looks at the buildings and the monuments. And this is a part of its annual reporting cycle. So that's what I said. So there is like one side of what that landscape actually means for various groups of people. But there is another side of how the landscape is legally managed, right? And often this is where the conflict comes up, because we go by what is just legally defined and we assume that's all it is. So it takes a while for us to break down the notion of, oh, wait, this is actually not all it is. This is just the legal side of things. Like, we're all bound by some sort of laws, right? But we all live our lives in complex ways. So it's the same with the landscape. And this is a landscape that has been a rich source of life for not just like medieval period, but early historic period, prehistoric period. I mean, there's like habitation going on there for thousands of years, which is fair because there are so many resources available at that location. So to make it easier again by law, we have a separate World Heritage Convention and we have an Intangible Heritage Convention. The Intangible Heritage Convention is meant to be a correction to the biases of the World Heritage List, where they say that communities can directly nominate locations for intangible heritage listing. But again, that becomes another list. And then that ends up maybe looking at only the practices, and it leaves behind like the setting of the practice, right? The two have to go hand in hand. You can't separate one from the other, right? So I would say from the conservation perspective, it is one of those disciplines where you not only need to have wide knowledge, you also have to have in-depth knowledge. So you need to be knowledgeable on a number of subjects. Knowledgeable on one subject alone is not adequate, because you need to know enough about other subjects to know we need to call in other experts.
Okay. Just one small question, because since you worked on field in these areas, Is it the ritual practices which you have mentioned about? So, did you or anybody had worked on the decade-wise ritual practices in and around the temple? How that has changed over the period of time, or something like that? Maybe there may be some changes. Maybe the mapping must have been done only with respect to the rituals or in and around the temple precinct.
Yes, I have done that as part of the ethnographic work I did, because understanding how people see the landscape as sacred is a way to enter the landscape. So for one sort of calendar year, I observed all the sort of festivities at different parts of the site, and I've mapped all of this. I've also spoken to the people who practice these rituals, and which is the point that I was trying to make again, that it is extremely unfair to expect to come in from the outside and say, oh, this is unchanging tradition from time immemorial, which makes no sense. Because let's say one family was in charge of one particular ritual, and there are no more descendants to that family, it passes on to another family, then the next family brings in their own sort of interpretations of that ritual, right? But what is important is, why is that ritual being practiced? Who is it making meaning to? How is it tied into that landscape? So those things sort of carry on, right? So it's about, like, for us to come in from the outside, it's about how do we negotiate that this landscape is a landscape that will always change, much as with any landscape. Like, our thoughts change every second. How do we expect a dynamic landscape with 60,000 people to stay frozen in time?
Thank you, Krupa.
Uh, Ma'am,
Okay, I do have a question here, Dr. Krupa. So I was just very curious to, I mean, it was a great insight on your intangible heritage, cultural landscape, natural and agricultural landscape. I mean, these are some certain areas wherein people never focus. I mean, we always go to Hampi as a visitor. We see the built heritage there, but once when we touch upon on these aspects, I mean, the social aspect, I mean, I was very curious to understand, are there any research done on the changing landscape with respect to socio-cultural aspects? I mean,
Yes, there are, but again, there are different levels. So there are scholars who have looked at the changing nature of the rituals and the traditions. And I don't just mean like the grand rituals like Jatre, but also like the significant rituals which are meaningful only to certain communities and who know when these rituals are undertaken. But apart from that, at the level of the everyday, so I would say that mine was one of the early works to look at that everyday, literally the day to day, not like in terms of the grandness, right? So there is the everyday level, which we might look at as a mundane or an ordinary level. How does this work? How is this woven into that landscape, right? Yeah, so that was like where I did my work.
Sorry, are there any research done with respect to any statistical figures on the changing landscape? I mean, the cultural landscapes. I mean, I'm just very curious to know on this aspect.
There are some work done from like a socioeconomic angle from tourism-based studies, but I would again caution about using numbers directly. I feel numbers are a starting point to develop more research questions, to develop more nuanced research questions. Numbers can give us the background. Here is something going on that the numbers are telling us. Now, which part of it can we then study?
Okay. Okay. Yeah. Thank you.
Krupa ma'am, you have a message from Sangamitra in the chat. I think she's your student. She was your student. You are able to read the chat?
Yeah,
or
I
you
can
want
read the
me to
chat
read
now.
it?
Hi, Sangamitra. I'm not sure what your question is. I can read your comment.
Yeah.
And I'm glad you were able to wrap up your thesis on
Yeah.
ritual.
Good evening, ma'am. Ma'am, I was telling that I did my work, like now later on, I'm thinking of carrying it as a research paper. So I was like, I like whatever place I took of Vishnupur houses and all. So it is an intensive study for almost 3 years, like data collection. So how to like map it out?
Okay, I think we lost Sangamitra, but Sangamitra, if you can hear me, like get in touch with me separately. Let's not get into in depth with this audience in terms of how to map the work that you've done in Bishnupur. But just to give the context again, so Sangamitra was doing the master's in interiors, and she was interested in vernacular households. So this was back in her hometown. So then I had given a suggestion of it's not just about documenting the objects which are there or the interior layouts of the vernacular households. It's also like, how are they making meaning out of these things? You know, what is the relationship between why this particular design solution emerged? What needs was it serving at the level of the household? And how did that then map onto that location? And how is it correlated with like the layout of the settlement itself? So that was her.
Any more questions? Ma'am, I think there are no more questions over here. Before wrapping up, I just wanted everyone at least to switch on their cameras. If this is the end, at least like we'll switch on the cameras to take a digital photo. As now that this is the mode. Yes, ma'am. So I think I've done with the photograph screenshot. So as we conclude our Enlightening Heritage Insights webinars, I would like to extend my heartfelt thanks to all participants who joined us today. We hope you leave with new insights and inspiration that will fuel your passion of our shared heritage. I would also like to express our deepest gratitude to Dr. Shaila Bantanur, Director of BMS School of Architecture, Yelahanka, and Architect Shobha Narendra Kumar, Director of CRDS, for their vision and leadership in organizing this Heritage Insight series, which has not only enriched our dialogue but also have laid the groundwork for future interdisciplinary collaboration across architecture, history, and the arts. Additionally, I extend our sincere thanks to our esteemed speaker, Dr. Krupa Rajangam, whose insights and expertise added immense value to our discussion and was inspiring and truly enriching for all of us. Thank you once again to everyone involved. Let's continue to celebrate and preserve the legacy of our past as we move forward together. Thank you.
Hi, sorry, I just had a question I typed in the chat. I'm traveling. Sorry, I can't speak.
Yeah. Okay, I'll just read the. Ma'am, can I read the question to you?
Yeah, sure.
Are there any literature references for studying the sacred aspects of cultural heritage?
Again, Shashank, I'm happy for you to like write to me if you want, because there are enough and more references, but it depends on which landscape, which site, which sacred aspect, right? So there's no one common answer. It really depends on where and what you're studying.
Okay, I'll get in touch with the BMS team to get your email ID.
Sure.
Thank you.
Yeah. I'm just putting it here anyways. I should have done that.
Yeah, and also for the participants, actually, we all these lecture series we are actually recording, and then this you can find it on our website, the link, as well as on the YouTube. We generally publish it so that you can even refer. Sometimes we may miss couple of slides while going through it, so you can refer, and then you can go through our videos which will be published soon after some editing and all that, so that can also you can refer. Yeah. Yes, Abhiram.
Yes, ma'am. So thank you, everyone. We'll see you in the next. I was not able to share the screen, but in the so we do have another research dialogue series which we'll be having on December 12th. So it is on SPSS by Dr. Shambhavi Mishra. I'm sorry that I couldn't share the screen now. So you can always get in touch with us, for any series, for the further series, even for the Heritage Insight series, which we'll be having hereafter every month.
All right. Bye, everyone.
Thank you.
Thank you.
Thank you. Thank you.